Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. Today we're talking about motivation, why a fully present player stops being a fully engaged one. Not all at once, gradually. The creative risks stop coming, the between-session energy dries up, the player who once argued passionately about every decision now just goes along. The table spill meets, nobody has quit, but something has clearly left the room, and many game masters have no framework for understanding what it was or where it went. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan do. Their self-determination theory identifies three basic psychological needs whose satisfaction predicts sustained intrinsic motivation, and whose frustration predicts exactly the kind of slow disengagement that I just described. So today we are applying that research directly to tabletop RPG, game mastering, and design. So let's get into it. Self-determination theory starts with a deceptively simple claim. Human beings are not primarily motivated by rewards. The theory proposes that people have three universal psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and that the satisfaction of those needs is what actually drives sustained, genuine engagement. Rewards can modify behavior in the short term. They can get someone to show up, to perform, to go through the motions. What they cannot reliably do in this view is make someone care. Autonomy is the experience of acting with genuine volition, feeling that what you are doing is self-endorsed rather than compelled. Competence is the experience of being effective, of feeling capable, and producing outcomes that matter to you. Relatedness is the experience of meaningful connection to others, of mattering to people who matter to you. All three are considered nearly universal. The research has replicated across cultures, age groups, workplaces, classrooms, and sports programs over several decades. SDT defines autonomy through a single distinction: volition versus control. When you feel like the genuine origin of your actions, you have autonomy. When you feel like you are being steered, you have lost it, regardless of how many options are technically available to you. A tightly designed dungeon crawl with narrow mechanical options can produce high autonomy if the choices inside it feel genuinely owned by the player. A freeform sandbox with unlimited options can produce zero autonomy if the game master's invisible expectations keep quietly overriding whatever players try to do. Game masters and designers often conflate giving players more options with giving players more autonomy. They are related, but they are not the same thing. SDT research supports the general hypothesis that choice has a positive effect on intrinsic motivation, but also shows that one can have no options and still feel autonomy if one willingly accepts the value of or has interest in pursuing the available behavior. Players need to feel that the choices in front of them are real, that their decisions have genuine consequences, and that the fiction will follow where they lead it. The size of the possibility space is largely irrelevant to that experience. Two genuine choices produce more autonomy satisfaction than 20 illusory ones. The failure mode that violates this most directly is railroading. And railroading is worth unpacking carefully because it exists on a spectrum. At one end is explicit railroading. The game master has a plot and the players are going to follow it. Every door that leads away from the story gets mysteriously locked or steered back to where the game master wants you to go. Every NPC who might complicate the narrative conveniently changes the subject. Players eventually learn that their choices don't branch outcomes, and they stop investing creative energy in making them. The session keeps moving, but the motivation quietly bleaches out. At the other end is something subtler and in some ways more damaging: the illusion of choice. This is when a game master presents what looks like a meaningful fork in the road. Players deliberate, make a decision, feel good about it, and then the fiction routes them back to the same place anyway. The bandits attack no matter which road they take. The dungeon entrance is different, but the interior is identical. Over time, players who become aware of this situation develop a specific kind of disengagement. They might stop arguing about decisions because they have learned, usually without consciously articulating it, that the decision doesn't matter. SDT specifically argues that autonomy is supported by experiences of interest and value and undermined by experiences of being externally controlled, whether by rewards or punishments. The illusion of choice is a form of external control. It looks like player agency and performs like player agency, but functionally operates as game master direction with extra steps. Now, here's the part that catches some game masters off guard. Tight structure does not have to undermine autonomy, and autonomy support does not require unlimited freedom. Even in a highly constrained environment, explaining why the constraints exist, acknowledging when they are frustrating, and allowing flexibility where possible supports more autonomy than simply issuing directives. The experience of autonomy is partly about the quality of the interaction and the rationale provided, not only the objective degree of freedom. In practice at the table, this means a game master who says the city gates are sealed by order of the magistrate, and you've heard it's because of the murders last week, is doing something motivationally different from a game master who says the gates are sealed, you can't go that way. Same constraint, but one of them explains the fictional logic. One of them just blocks the path. Providing rationales for constraints is a consistent feature of autonomy supportive behavior in SDT research. Competence is the need to feel effective in your interactions with the environment, to experience mastery, growth, and the ability to produce desired outcomes through your actions. It's why people voluntarily attempt difficult things. The challenge is motivated, provided it sits in the right zone. Too easy and people get bored, too far beyond their reach and they disengage. At the table, competence shows up in a specific way. It's the feeling a player gets when their decisions actually did something. When the plan they built across 3 sessions finally paid off. When the character they've been developing feels genuinely capable inside the fiction. When they know the world well enough to make smart calls and see those calls rewarded with interesting outcomes. That feeling is not a luxury. According to SDT, it's a psychological nutrient. Without it, motivation can degrade. The research on what actually produces or destroys that feeling points specifically at feedback. So let's run that through a game master scenario. A player attempts a persuasion roll to convince a suspicious merchant to sell them restricted goods. They roll poorly. Here are 2 possible responses. The game master says, "You fail," the merchant isn't interested. That is amotivating feedback. It communicates incompetence and closes the scene with no traction. The game master says, "The merchant's expression shifts when you mention the trade guild. He doesn't say no outright, but he's clearly waiting to hear something that would make this worth his while." That is informational feedback. The character was not effective enough to close the deal, but the player now has meaningful information about the fiction and a legible path forward. They failed, but they still feel competent. That response costs the game master nothing extra. It's just a different orientation toward what failure means. But motivationally, it produces a completely different experience for the player. The need for competence is best satisfied within well-structured environments that afford optimal challenges, positive feedback, and opportunities for growth. A challenge that requires no skill does not produce a sense of competence when cleared. A challenge that is simply impossible doesn't either. The motivating zone is the one where a player can feel the gap between where they are and where they need to be, has a plausible path to closing it, and receives clear feedback when they move toward it or away from it. This is where a specific design failure becomes visible: opacity. When a player cannot read the fiction well enough to understand why their actions succeeded or failed, effort decouples from outcome. They stop feeling competent because failure and success both feel arbitrary. The dice are doing something, but the logic behind it is invisible. Over multiple sessions, that opacity produces the same disengagement as actual repeated failure, because the experience of competence requires traceability. Players need to be able to point at what they did and see its effect. The save or die mechanic is the sharpest historical example of this in system design. A character who has built over dozens of sessions, whose player has invested hours in development and narrative, can be erased by a single die roll with no warning and no input from the player beyond the number they generate. The mechanical outcome is identical to other forms of high-stakes failure, but the motivational damage is disproportionate. There is no competence information in a save or die result. It communicates nothing except that randomness exists. Modern design has largely moved away from this pattern, and the SDT framework explains exactly why that movement was made. Of the 3 needs, relatedness is the one most likely to get underestimated at the design level. Autonomy and competence have obvious mechanical homes: choice architecture, resolution systems, feedback loops. Relatedness feels more like a social thing, something that happens between people at the table and therefore outside the jurisdiction of the rulebook. That assumption in this view is not correct, and it costs a lot of campaigns. Relatedness is the need to feel close to, involved with, and genuinely cared for by significant others. As a profoundly social species, humans are strongly motivated to form durable interpersonal bonds and to resist their dissolution, continuously monitoring their social environments for signals of acceptance and rejection. At the table, those signals are everywhere. A player whose character gets narratively sidelined for 3 sessions is receiving one kind of signal. A player whose choices ripple outward and visibly affect what other characters care about is receiving another. The fiction is a social environment, and players are reading it like one. Relatedness doesn't require intimacy in every relationship, but it does require a basic sense of being seen, valued, and understood. That is the practical threshold. A player doesn't need their character to be the protagonist of every scene. They need to feel that their character matters to the story and to the other people in it. When that feeling is absent, engagement at the table tends to become more performative. The most common way this fails in long campaigns is gradual spotlight erosion. The party focuses on a party member whose backstory happens to connect to the main plot. Over several sessions, that character's history starts dominating the narrative. Scenes increasingly center on their relationships, their antagonists, their arc. The other players are present, helpful, engaged in the mechanical sense, and quietly losing the thread of why their character belongs in this story. Nobody decided to sideline them. The fiction just naturally flowed toward what felt dramatically urgent, and that flow left some players on the outside of the story's emotional core. This is more of a facilitation problem before it's a player problem, but it has a structural solution. Relatedness within SDT connects closely to internalization. When people feel connected to others who value an activity, they adopt that value as their own. Mentorship, peer communities, and team belonging all operate through this mechanism. At the table, the equivalent is building mechanical and narrative reasons for characters to genuinely depend on each other, not just tactically, but fictionally or emotionally. When a character's history, beliefs, or relationships give other characters something to care about, relatedness has a structural anchor rather than just a social one. The design-level version of this problem is what happens when a system treats the party as a collection of individual stat blocks rather than a group of people with stakes in each other. Class-based systems are particularly prone to this. The fighter and the wizard might need each other mechanically. One absorbs damage, one casts spells, but the mechanics say nothing about whether those characters have any fictional reason to be invested in each other's outcomes. The mechanical interdependence exists. The relational investment has to be invented entirely outside the system. Some groups manage it anyway through strong role-play cultures. Systems that build relationship structure in at the design level are doing exactly what that research suggests is necessary. There is one more relatedness failure worth discussing because it tends to be invisible until it's already done significant damage. The NPC as set piece. When NPCs exist purely to deliver information, provide quests, or represent obstacles, the world signals to players that relationships in the fiction are transactional. The innkeeper has no memory of the party. The merchant who was saved last session treats them like strangers. The contact who provided crucial intelligence 2 arcs ago has no ongoing stake in what happens to them. Over time, players in this environment stop investing emotionally in NPCs because the fiction keeps signaling that the investment is one-directional. SDT research consistently shows that felt support, the sense of being genuinely cared for rather than merely tolerated, is the active ingredient in relatedness satisfaction. NPCs who remember, who reciprocate, who have their own stakes in the party's survival are doing real motivational work. Alright, so the previous 3 sections covered what autonomy, competence, and relatedness are and where they can fail. This section is about what a game master can do about it specifically and practically before or during a session. A large body of empirical evidence based on SDT suggests that teachers' support of students' basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness facilitates autonomous self-regulation, engagement, and well-being. The Game Master occupies a structurally similar role. Someone who designs and facilitates an experience for a group, controls the environment they operate in, and makes moment-to-moment decisions that either support or undermine psychological needs. The research on what works in classrooms transfers with relatively little friction. Alongside offering meaningful choices, teachers can support autonomy by taking students' interests into account, and research shows that doing so also leads students to judge the teacher as more competent. The tabletop role-playing game equivalent is Session 0 and its ongoing practice throughout a campaign. A game master who periodically checks in with players about what their characters want and what storylines they are most invested in is performing autonomy support. The second tool is rationale provision. Anytime the fiction constrains what players can do, a brief in-world explanation preserves autonomy inside the constraint. Providing meaningful choices and rationales significantly boosts player autonomy and engagement. The third tool is branching with genuine consequence. Before a session, run a quick test on any major decision point. If players take path A versus path B, do those paths produce meaningfully different fictional outcomes? If the honest answer is no, the choice is an illusion. This requires targeted prep on the most visible decision points and not meant to be unlimited prep on everything. Educators can foster feelings of competence by giving clear instructions and offering positive and constructive feedback. At the table, the most direct application is what happens immediately after a roll. A failed roll that tells the player something useful about the world preserves competence. A failed roll that just ends the scene doesn't. The second tool is visible consequence tracking. When earlier decisions show up later in the fiction, explicitly and traceably, players feel more competent. The bandit leader they spared 2 sessions ago just became an unlikely ally. The information extracted from that interrogation just changed the shape of the climax. Those callbacks don't require extra prep if the game master is already tracking the fiction. They just require that the connection is made visible rather than passing unacknowledged. Relatedness is facilitated by conveyance of respect and caring, and thwarting any of the 3 basic needs is seen as damaging to motivation and wellness. In practical terms, relatedness support operates on 2 tracks simultaneously: the social layer and the fictional layer. At the social layer, the intervention is equitable spotlight distribution. Equitable across a campaign means every player can look back and identify moments where their characters' history, relationships, or choices drove the story forward. A game master who tracks this informally catches spotlight erosion before it becomes a retention problem. At the fictional layer, a useful tool is NPC investment architecture. NPCs who remember the party, reference past interactions, and have ongoing stakes in what players do signal that presence in the fiction matters. A merchant who mentions the route the party cleared is bringing traders through again. An antagonist who has adapted their tactics specifically because of how the players operate. Each of those beats costs almost nothing in prep and does significant motivational work. The third tool is inter-character investment prompts. Early in a campaign, build situations that require characters to depend on each other's specific knowledge, relationships, or history rather than just their mechanics. The question isn't who has the highest stealth score, it's whose history makes this possible. When the fiction consistently routes through what characters know and who they are, the party starts to feel like people with interlocking lives rather than a team of complementary statistics. Now let's talk about this from a design angle. Everything in the Game Master Toolkit operates at the facilitation layer. This section moves upstream to the design layer, the choices baked into a system before anyone sits down to play. A game master working against the system's structural assumptions is doing extra work every session. A game master working with them barely has to think about it. Another study applied SDT directly to video game engagement and found that both the appeal and the well-being aspects of games are based in their potential to satisfy basic psychological needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. The mechanism is the same for tabletop design. A system's rules are the architecture that makes certain psychological experiences possible or impossible. The question worth asking of any system is not only does this work mechanically, but what does this make players feel, and which of their needs does it support or leave unaddressed? The sequencing of a resolution mechanic is one of the most direct autonomy signals a system sends. When a player declares their intention, selects their approach, and only then receives a mechanical evaluation, the fiction is driving the mechanics. When the sequence runs the other way, where the game master assigns a difficulty before the player has fully committed, or the mechanical result arrives before the fictional logic is established, the player is being processed rather than consulted. Some systems address this through retroactive narrative tools, mechanics that let players establish fictional conditions after a scene has started, rather than requiring all participation up front. These mechanics prevent the feeling of being caught in a situation the player had no hand in creating. At the other end, a system whose published adventures require specific plot beats to occur regardless of player action trains a specific response over time. Players might stop investing in long-term strategy because the fiction has taught them the story proceeds according to its own logic. The most direct competence question a designer can ask is whether their resolution system produces viable, traceable feedback. As I mentioned before, the competence failure hardest to spot might be opacity. A system that consistently produces outcomes players cannot trace back to their own decisions produces the same disengagement as repeated failure, because the experience of competence requires traceability. When high investment in a skill produces no reliably different result from low investment across a campaign, players might register that mismatch and stop making those choices with genuine care. Some systems build inter-character relationship structure directly into character creation. Questions that require players to establish specific connections with other characters before the first session, about debts or lies, histories, loyalties, are a structural commitment to relatedness. Every character arrives at session 0 with pre-existing stakes in the people around them, generated by the system rather than assembled from scratch through social effort. Systems that leave the party's reason for existing together entirely unaddressed operate on the assumption that strangers assembled in the same location will naturally develop fictional bonds through play. The SDT audit for any system comes down to 3 questions. Can players point to their decisions and see their effects in the fiction? Does the system provide meaningful feedback about whether players are being effective? Does the system create any mechanical reason for characters to matter to each other? Now let's talk about the pitfalls of this framework. Any framework this broadly applicable comes with misreadings. SDT has a few that show up consistently when game masters and designers start applying it. Autonomy means total freedom. This is the most common misreading, and it produces one of 2 overcorrections. A game master strips all constraints from the fiction to maximize choice, or dismisses SDT entirely because total freedom would make the game unrunnable. Autonomy in SDT means experiencing your own volition in action, the sense that your choices align with your own values and judgments, even if that choice is to follow an instruction. A dungeon with 3 rooms and 1 exit can produce strong autonomy if the decisions inside those rooms feel genuinely owned by the players. The test is the quality of the choices, not necessarily the quantity. Structure and autonomy coexist fine. The damage arrives when a game master presents the fiction of agency while exercising invisible control, when players believe their decisions matter and the evidence quietly accumulates that they do not. Confusing deliberate players with disengaged ones. SDT describes disengagement as a symptom of need frustration, and that framing can be misapplied. A quiet or slow player gets read as a need failure, and the game master starts intervening. Some players are deliberate. They think carefully, observe before acting, prefer to let situations develop. Those are playstyle preferences. The actual signal for SDT-type disengagement is trajectory. Is this player becoming less invested over time, contributing less across sessions, showing fewer signs of genuine care about outcomes? A player who has always been quiet might be just fine. A player who used to argue passionately and now just agrees with whoever speaks first might be giving you a signal worth investigating. Using SDT to blame the player anyway. Amotivation, the complete absence of motivation, often results from prolonged need frustration, repeated competence thwarting, autonomy thwarting, or relatedness thwarting. SDT points consistently to conditions, not people. A player who has drifted into apathy almost certainly arrived there through a sequence of unmet needs produced by design, or facilitation, or some other reason. The wrong diagnosis produces the wrong fix. A game master who concludes the player is simply a bad fit might have stopped diagnosing entirely. Look at the conditions before looking at the person. The conditions are almost always where the actual problem lives. So now let's look at the step-by-step guide. This section is the practical side, a 6-step process a game master can run on any campaign, active or in planning, to audit and improve need support at the table. The first 3 steps are diagnostic. The last 3 are operational. First, run the 3-question audit on your last 3 sessions. For each of the last 3 sessions, answer these honestly. Could any player point to a decision they made and trace its effect on the fiction? Did any player receive feedback after a roll that gave them useful information rather than just a mechanical result? Did any scene route through a specific character's history or relationships in a way that could not have happened with a different character? You're looking for patterns across all 3 sessions. One good moment, of course, is not a pattern. Next, identify which need is most consistently unmet. SDT research consistently links the thwarting of basic psychological needs to poor qualities of motivation, low engagement, and disengagement over time. The needs compound, so find the primary leak first. Next, audit your prep structure. For each major scene in your upcoming session, ask which need it supports. Does it give players a legible choice with traceable consequences? A moment where their effort visibly matters. A reason to need each other specifically. If a scene supports none of the 3, that doesn't mean cut it. It means that going in, it's motivationally neutral. And consider whether one small adjustment, moving a detail, adding a consequence, routing a moment through a character's history, might be able to change that. Next, build one concrete support for each need into every session. One per need across the session. For autonomy, identify one genuine decision fork where you have actually thought through what each path produces. For competence, identify one moment where a decision pays off visibly and traceably. For relatedness, identify one scene that routes through a specific character's history or relationships and give it to the player who has had the least fictional focus recently. Next, run informational feedback as a default. STT research distinguishes feedback that has informational significance, providing inputs that help a person improve or highlight areas of competence, from feedback that has controlling significance, communicating external judgment rather than useful information. Informational feedback tends to enhance intrinsic motivation. So make it the default response to every roll outcome. A failed roll should tell the player something about the world that they did not know before. You succeed and you fail are mechanical reports. Next, check in outside the session. STT-informed intervention research identifies active listening, perspective taking, and authentic interest in others as core relatedness supportive behaviors. A brief check-in between sessions about what a player's character wants, what they're enjoying, what feels flat. It also surfaces need failures before they become disengagement. A player who says my character feels like they have been along for the ride is giving you an autonomy and relatedness signal. A player who says I keep rolling well but nothing seems to change is giving you a competence signal. Those signals are far easier to act on as a message than as someone quietly declining to book the next session. The check-in doesn't need to be formal. The habit matters more than the format. In this view, STT tells you what any campaign in any system has to produce in the people playing it for that campaign to hold. 3 things: the felt sense that their choices genuinely matter, the felt sense that their engagement produces meaningful outcomes, and the felt sense that their characters belong to the story and to each other. Your homework is simple. Pick the one need from this video that you think your table is worst at supporting and run one deliberate intervention next session. One genuine decision fork for autonomy, one piece of informational feedback for competence, or one scene routed through a specific character's history for relatedness. One need, one session, one intentional move. See what it produces. And then let me know in the comments below. So recently I was invited as a guest onto the Creative Contraband podcast, where I talk about Game Master authority. So you should go and check it out. There's a link down below. And check out some of those other episodes because they do some really interesting work over there. If you found this video useful, please hit that like button, share with someone who you think would appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.